Jane Unchained, Live Talk, our Boycott Meat Roundtable. So much going on. I can tell you right now that we've got really a highly controversial ritual that kills tens of thousands of chickens going on in New York City. Here are some photos that we can show you from past years, but the killing is pretty much the same. It is grotesque. The animals are brought in, the chickens, by the tens of thousands, and they are slaughtered, and their entrails are hanging out, and it's all happening in front of people, and indeed children even participate. Perhaps we can go to this first. Donny Moss, you just got back from the ritual. Tell us what you saw, especially during this time of pandemics, which is a zoonotic disease that jumped from humans to animals.
Yeah, so Jane, I just got back from Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which is one of 3 neighborhoods in Brooklyn where literally tens of thousands of people physically handle live chickens, mostly without any sort of PPE. They take them out of these crates, swing them around their heads, and then they're slaughtered in these makeshift slaughterhouses that are erected on public streets in residential neighborhoods without permits, in violation of 8 city health codes and several city and state cruelty laws. And so we have always thought that this ritual animal sacrifice that comes before the Jewish Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, should be banned for all of those reasons. But this year, in the midst of a pandemic, people were engaging in this ritual. Not one person was wearing a mask. There was no social distancing at all. We were there as activists, not only to document what was happening, but also to provide chicken care, watermelon and water to the chickens in the crates, because if activists weren't there, they would get no nourishment at all. And we can only reach, a small fraction of them, sadly.
Well, I want to show a video that you shot last year that you sent me. Now, I warn you, if there are children watching, take them away. Although children participate in this ritual. That's another shocker. It's highly disturbing. Joe, I would like you to watch this. This is the reality of animal slaughter. Whether it happens in a wet market in China, whether it happens in a factory farm in Iowa, whether it happens on the streets of New York City in a religious ritual, there is an underlying commonality of violence, bloodshed, and, dare I say, sadism. Wow. It's hard for me to look at. It makes me just wonder about our humanity as a species. What is it like, Donny, to even video something like that?
It's like, it's a little bit surreal. It's surreal, it's real any year, especially this year, because of what else is going on, because now we understand that this type of activity is not only horrifically cruel, but can make everybody's sick. We're all at risk of disease because people in a small neighborhood in Brooklyn are doing that. I don't think the public understood that until now, and I guess most of the public still doesn't understand that. It's really upsetting, Jane, because you see their legs flailing about, and and they're alive. And sometimes after they're bled out in those cones, they're stuffed into black garbage bags, and you still see them flailing about in the bags. And we have found live chickens the following morning that they were sort of somehow survived the night, and so just the brutality. But what you saw is only a fraction of it. I mean, what you didn't see in that clip is that these chickens are held in crates for several days with no food or water, protection from weather extremes, veterinary care, and they're just suffering in these crates, the dead mixed with the living, before they're used in this ritual where they're swung in the air by their fragile wings and then have their throats slit. So what you saw is just the grisly end of a very, very long, drawn-out period of cruelty for these animals. Not to mention the factory farms where they came from.
Exactly. Now, one thing I want to mention is that there is a commonality with the other boycott meat efforts, because you're saying that city officials are looking the other way, that there are violations and they're just not enforced no matter how many times you point it out. And before anybody says, well, you're engaging in religious discrimination, not only are you Jewish, but many, many, many hundreds of rabbis have said, no, we can use coins instead of live chickens. And that is something that rabbis around the world, including others, followers of the Jewish faith, have been calling for.
Yeah, I mean, we have on camera Hasidic people who have come to the realization on their own that this is cruel. And so, we are making a little bit of progress, but it's hard. This ritual, like many others, is entrenched in the community. It's a money-making business for some people, and it's just not going to go away quickly. And, the reason this is allowed to continue, in spite of the fact that it puts us all at risk of disease, according to a toxicologist who's actually studied fecal and blood samples taken off the streets. And in spite of the health code violations, the city allows this to go on and actually aids and abets in the crimes by providing floodlights and barricades and even orange cones to bleed out the chickens onto the streets. The city aids and abets because the people who practice this ritual comprise a very large voting bloc. They deliver an estimated 300,000 votes in New York City, which can make or break an election. And so this is what we're up against.
Now, let me thank you for bringing us that incredibly gut-wrenching story. We want to get to Renee King-Sonnen of Rowdy Girl Sanctuary, but I want to ask you, Joe Enriquez, Henry, you are the founder of Boycott Meat. You're the one who inspired this roundtable, which we do every week. You are trying to protect workers who are also dying in slaughterhouses. They're dying of COVID. And to make the connection between what Donny's talking about and what you're talking about, there's an article in the Aberdeen News that says the big meat gang is getting awfully smelly, and talks about how the meat lobbyists essentially worked hand in hand with the Trump administration to come out and issue the, meat is an essential product and it's part of our critical infrastructure, and basically to barrel this industry ahead at a time when there were mass infections, and there are still mass infections going on in some parts of the world over COVID at slaughterhouses, including, here in North America. And essentially saying that the administration was working for the meat industry, not working for the workers, not working for the citizens, but actually following the dictates of the meat industry. And mind you, two of the biggest meat corporations aren't even American. Smithfield is owned by a Chinese conglomerate, and JBS is owned by a Brazilian conglomerate. Joe.
So clearly, I mean, here the meat industry is writing the talking points to the executive branch to protect themselves, to protect their self-interest. The executive action that was put forth by Trump was written by the meat industry. We cannot allow this to happen. This needs to stop. What we're going to start doing now here at boycottmeat.com is we're going to bring on an intern. We're going to start getting information out on a weekly basis to all our supporters. We have to provide more information. We know that workers are protesting. They're demanding action. They want justice, not just for their sakes, but also for the safety of the American public. So more needs to be done, and we're going to act on it.
Now, Renee King-Sonnen, you have the big picture as a former cattle rancher with your husband who turned your Texas cattle ranch into a veganic animal sanctuary, where you have talked about, and you run the Ranchers Advocacy Program to help farmers move beyond animals to make money, thrive, doing something else. What is your take as you see essentially that this government, whether it's city, as in the case of the chicken slaughter, or federal, as in the case of the slaughterhouse workers, is clearly aligned with those who are killing animals and against the consumers and the workers?
Oh, it is. I mean, as somebody that used to be in the industry, I watch that footage, and to have the kind of feelings I was having in that footage, it brought tears to my eyes. It's so hard to see that footage and to think that we used to participate in that kind of cruelty, and to think that people all over the world participate in this cruelty, just that are desensitized. Absolutely, our cattle ranchers, our chicken farmers, our goat farmers, the government, all of them. Humanity is desensitized to the horrors of what we just saw in that footage that Donny so graphically portrayed. I'm so grateful that their lives were not in vain. That, as hard as that is to see. I remember when we rescued those 15 chickens. They looked just like those poor souls, those Cornish crosses from that slaughterhouse that went bankrupt in La Salle, Colorado. This happened in January of 2019. Those poor souls were cannibalizing each other. They were living in degrees of 5-degree weather. They had no food, no water, and the slaughterhouse worker was literally going in and having people just yank their heads off and throw them back into the rest of the chickens, the live chickens, just like Donny was explaining, the living amongst the dead. And it's heart-wrenching to think that 36,000 chickens, just like the ones you're seeing right there, met a terrible fate, and we were able to rescue 15 of them. They were transported by truck from Colorado to Rowdy and other sanctuaries all over the country. So it doesn't have to be this way. We have to start seeing the souls that are behind those eyes. We have to start seeing that those are living, breathing animals that want to live. They do not deserve this horrific torture that humanity has induced upon them.
And the torture is now coming back to haunt us. It all comes out in the wash. With any horror that is inflicted by a dominant group on a less powerful group, human or animal, it eventually, the blowback happens. And we are seeing the blowback now. Again, we are in the midst of a pandemic that is caused by a zoonotic disease, and first was spotted at a wet market in China. And, these conspiracy theories about a lab, they've all been discredited. It's the logical conclusion. It started at a wet market in Wuhan, China, just like SARS started in a wet market in another province in China. And just like, swine flu and mad cow disease and avian flu start in farms and or slaughterhouses, Donny, it's not brain surgery to connect the dots. And yet so many people are still trying to hang on to that old entitlement. What Now, Dr. Melanie Joy, a Harvard-trained social psychologist and best-selling author, has called carnistic privilege, which I think is absolutely brilliant. You know, there's white privilege, there's male privilege, there's rich privilege, and now she's coined the term carnistic privilege, where essentially asking anybody to make a minor change in their lifestyle by, let's say, substituting a plant-based burger for a meat burger, instead of being regarded as what it is, at best a minor inconvenience once till you get used to it, and then wow, you avoid heart disease and all sorts of other problems. It's regarded as a violation of their rights, a dictate that is life-changing, that they have that essentially is crushing their lifestyle. And that's what privilege is. It's privilege is something where you are so used to your special entitlements that any effort to even encroach on them a little bit is regarded with complete defiance. And you know, I want to go back to Joe Enriquez Henry on this, because you don't come at it initially anyway from an animal rights perspective. You're coming at it from a workers' rights perspective. But now the blowback is coming onto these workers, Joe. They're the ones paying the ultimate price for our addiction to meat.
True, Jane. I mean, clearly, and workers are understanding this. They know the issue, and we're getting a lot of public support too. The danger is in the meat production. Workers understand that. Clearly, they do. They're dying. We've seen that. Over 200,000 have been infected. 40-some thousand have died. I mean, 200 have died. So clearly, everybody knows what's going on, but we need to rally the forces. We need more community support. I think we're going to get there. This is going to be a long fight, but we're going to get it done.
So let me go back to Donny Moss, because, you know, obviously you come at it from an animal rights perspective. You're the founder of TheirTurn.net, which is an incredible resource for the latest in animal rights news. You take on the most difficult cases, Donny, and you've won cases that everybody said were absolutely unwinnable by speaking truth to power. But ultimately, this is a consumer issue. In your case specifically, what's happening in Brooklyn, it would be categorized as a religious issue, but ultimately, I feel if we were in a plant-based society, that would automatically be considered, no, that can't happen. You know, we no longer sacrifice virgins into a synode either. You know, there are certain aspects of religion, any religion you look at, whether it's the Crusades in the Middle Ages, which were basically just traveling massacres, the Christian community decided that they were going to enforce their religion on other peoples. We can look back at the Crusades of the Middle Ages and say how barbaric. Well, it's very hard to look at things that are happening today and recognize their barbarism. But I defy anybody to look at the video we just played and say that's okay, that's morally right, that's spiritual.
You know, tradition is never an excuse for abuse. And as it happens in this particular ritual called Kaporos, where the practitioners are transferring their sins to a chicken, and then the chicken is killed so that their sins, the human sins, die along with the chicken before the Jewish Day of Atonement. That ritual can be performed according to Jewish law with coins. And so individuals can swing coins around their heads and then donate those coins to charity. So there's no mandate to do this. But even if there was, you know, the decision to eat animals in 2020, the decision to harm them this way, it's no longer a personal choice. It affects all of us. People say it's my choice to eat animals. Well, now we understand, because of this zoonotic disease pandemic that we're experiencing right now, that decision affects all of us. If people weren't consuming animals, slaughtering them, collecting them, hunting them, then these diseases wouldn't be spilling over from the animals into humans, and then we wouldn't be giving it to each other. So we have to stop consuming. We have to leave these animals alone. Believe this disease didn't happen to us, COVID-19. It happened because of us.
Exactly. And, there are some great memes out there that talk about this, and I'll put on a couple. Mad cow disease from cows, swine flu from pigs, SARS from bats and civets, bird flu from poultry, MERS from bats and camels, COVID from a meat market, stemming from bats to pangolins to meat. But today, what boggles my mind is that even though consumers are switching to plant-based products at a skyrocketing rate, I mean, really, that is the silver lining in this terrible tragedy, is that people are going plant-based. There is still a very, very large intransigent group of people, and it's not political. In other words, it's not just you can say, oh, this group of people is intransigent. No, I have talked to the most liberal, so-called environmentalists, humanitarians against world hunger about this issue, and gotten absolutely nowhere except an eye roll and a guffaw as they turn their back on me and walk away. So it really crosses all political lines, where it's very simple math. We are 7.8 billion humans. We are systematically raising and killing 70 billion land animals every year who eat a lot more than we do. And so, again, it's not just that they eat a lot more than we do, it's that what they consume and then produce as meat is highly inefficient. It takes 8 to 25 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of beef. 75% at least of all soy produced is consumed by farm animals. So it doesn't take a knowledge of higher math to realize, wow, if we reduce the number of animals that we're raising and killing for food, took the food that we give to them and give it to hungry children, we could end world hunger. It's a very simple mathematical formula. So maybe I could throw this over to Renee. Renee, why do you think it is that people who should embrace this won't embrace it? I mean, it's really somebody who's fighting world hunger. This should be right up their alley, and yet they have extraordinary resistance to it.
Well, I think people resist it. I mean, Donny alluded to it when he talked about tradition is not an excuse. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in, it's still an excuse. They are still using that as an excuse. People will use the fact that they're Hispanic. Joe can, I'm sure, attest to that. I've heard that dozens of times. How come it's so hard to quit eating animals? Well, I'm Hispanic. My culture, my heritage, cattle rancher families. I'm Jewish. I'm Italian. There's always these reasons why people can't quit eating animal products. They're afraid they're going to upset their mother who makes these, dishes that were handed down from great grandma and great 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 grandma. It's tough. I mean, I can tell you that coming from the family that I'm in with Tommy, the Sonnens, when we went vegan, it's tough. The whole family unit is so invested in coming together around holidays over dead bodies. I think that is one of the biggest problems, is that we need a campaign, just like there's a campaign to eat animals all over. We need a campaign that involves not eating animals, that people can start buying into, and it needs to be all over, not only social media, but all over, the news. I mean, we need to somehow get in the news.
Well, first of all, forget about advertiser-based media, because they're controlled by the meat, dairy, and pharmaceutical industries. Most of the commercials are meat, dairy. That's why, as much as social media is a flawed institution, and there's a lot of reporting on that now, we're lucky to have social media. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to. We'd be doing what they did in the 15th century with Martin Luther, nailing treatises to the doors of our neighbors. I mean, we're doing what we can to get the word out this way. But you raised a very important point. you said, as long as all these family gatherings are based around a dead animal, well, see, to quote Dr. Silas Rao, who wants to create a vegan world by 2026, and he's a Stanford systems analyst and engineer, said nature is a lot smarter than we are, and has told us essentially, go to your rooms, think about how you're living, and come back more evolved, or you as a species are done. Well, I noticed even in my neighborhood, the amount of barbecuing reduced radically this summer because people were social distancing. Now people are thinking about, wait, how am I going to go to Thanksgiving? Well, there isn't going to be the Norman Rockwell-esque gathering around a dead turkey for Thanksgiving, hopefully, because people are smart and they stay safe, hopefully. So I honestly see institutions really these, in the 14th century, the plague actually introduced the modern era. It was a very strict feudalistic society, and it crumbled during the Black Death, which killed half of Europe and really destroyed the feudal order to a great degree and allowed a lot of intermingling between different social classes. I see a similar kind of crumbling today. Obviously, we know there's a lot of work from home, and we know that a lot of things are changing, but I think it's changing our food system too. And I don't know who wants to address that. Do you want to address that, Joe? You're muted. Unmute yourself.
So what I was going to say in regards to what Renee brought up is this is going to require ongoing education, making it very clear how unhealthy this is, how immoral, unethical it is.
Oh, we lost.
To eat meat. This is like fighting big tobacco decades ago. We have to educate people. We have to do visible protests. We are forming that coalition. We do have that group, but more needs to be done. We need to expand this. Now, I got to tell you, we're having a lot of people contacting us at boycottmeat.com, and that's why we're bringing on some staff to help us communicate out there what people can do in their own areas across the country. So I know we can gather steam, but we have to get the education out there. We can do this, but it will take time to do it.
Well, first of all, I think that what you're doing, Joe, is a breakthrough for our movement, because every other campaign that has been launched to stop the killing of animals has been launched primarily by animal activists and health activists. People who are either motivated to stop people dying of cancer. Processed meat is officially cancer causing. It's a class 1 carcinogen. And heart disease is America's leading killer prior to COVID, certainly. It's to a large degree caused by your arteries getting clogged with plaque, which comes from cholesterol from animal products. So you either had people who were saying, don't eat animals for health, or you were saying, don't eat animals because it's cruel, it's sadistic, it's unfair. And then you had the environmental angle. Don't eat animals because animal agriculture is destroying the planet. It is the leading cause of deforestation, habitat destruction, wildlife extinction, water pollution, drought. It takes 600 gallons of water. If you're a vegan, you save 600 gallons of water a day just by being a vegan. That's not for me. That's from National Geographic. So this is the first time I've seen a movement that has started up where it's people fighting for workers' rights. And that's a very important piece of the puzzle, Donny, because there are many people who just feel that the only thing they can care about is people, and that to care about animals somehow takes away from their caring about people, like it's mutually exclusive, which it's not. I mean, that's as ridiculous as saying going to the movies is mutually exclusive with helping people. Like it's dumb as saying, jogging is exclusive. If you want to help people, don't go jogging. It doesn't make any sense, but people take that attitude. I care about people. Well, if you care about people, you'd want to stop climate change. You'd want to stop people dying of heart disease. But put all that aside, now you have people dying right in your face where you can't ignore it because of slaughterhouses. Like, it's documented. They go into this building, they slaughter animals, and then they end up dead, just like the animals they slaughter. So do you feel that this is an important, Donny, development in our movement?
Well, first of all, I just want to echo what you said, and that is compassion isn't finite. We can have compassion for both humans and for non-human animals. And today, in one of the Capora sites that we were in Williamsburg, where an Hispanic man who, told one of the activists he hadn't worked in 2 months and was desperate for a job, and it was the only reason he took this job, which was yanking chickens out of these crates and giving them to people to swing around their heads. And he said that he was just so traumatized by his first day of work. And so one of the activists is going to help him with job placement. But yeah, I mean, as activists, we care about humans and animals. We want everybody to live free from harm. I've been struck by one thing, though, Jane, during this pandemic, and that is, at the very beginning, when there was more talk about COVID-19 emerging from or originating in a wet market in China, there was talk about the live animal markets in New York City because we have about 80 of them, and they could transmit zoonotic diseases as well. And so there was a little bit of news coverage at the beginning, which was great. But I've been sort of disappointed by the lack of public discourse about how COVID-19 emerged and what we can do as a species to prevent another zoonotic disease, another pandemic from occurring. Has anybody noticed that? Nobody's talking about what we're going to do to prevent another one. We're just talking about what to do to get through this one. It's jarring.
Hey, pandemics are good for ratings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like nobody can see past their nose to think about the big picture, when it comes to anything. This administration is great for ratings. Okay, what are some of the collateral damage?
It's we forget, Jane, I just want to add one thing, and that is it's as though, we go through a catastrophe and then we move on, we forget. It's not that long ago that we were burning down the Amazon to graze, to make more space to graze cattle and grow soy to feed them.
We're still doing it.
And, right, of course. And people were up in arms when it was in the news. Wow. And there was public discourse about the fact that it was being burned down to graze cattle. And maybe that's something we should think about. But like everything else, it just kind of went away. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen with COVID-19. I mean, hasn't this pandemic been disruptive and deadly enough that we should be asking ourselves what we can do to prevent this from happening again? But, it just seems like, people don't want to change. Renee pointed out, was talking about tradition and family and culture. People, I just think also people don't like change. I once worked at a big company and I was told that I was going to have a new boss and I was upset about it. And somebody said, get used to it. Change happens. Yeah. And so adapt. But it just doesn't seem like that's something people are willing to do in spite of what's happening to us right now.
Well, let me say this. We could easily have another pandemic. I mean, scientists are talking about that there's a toxic brew out there that if we keep ignoring it, and from what I've read, and I want to point out, I'm not a scientist and I'm not a doctor, but hey, that doesn't stop all these other pontificators out there who are pontificating and giving people really questionable advice about what to do. The truth is that from what I've read, if there were a pandemic that started not in a retail market where you're dealing with a combination of wild animals and domestic animals, but if it started in a factory farm where these chickens are bred to be almost genetically identical, that means, according to what I read, that pandemic would spread much more quickly through them because it wouldn't have to adapt to each individual, and it could be even deadlier. And instead of worrying about that and telling people to transition, I'm talking about the United States government, the Chinese government, all these governments, the Canadian government, the European government, instead of having a come to Jesus moment and looking in the mirror and saying, wow, this meat thing isn't working. We need to transition to a plant-based society for climate change, for our outrageous healthcare costs, for the possibility of another pandemic. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. And yet, instead of doing that, what are they doing, according to these articles? Doubling down and actually coordinating with the meat industry to make sure that these dead animal products are still going on no matter what. You know what? It's not absolutely out of the realm of possibility that humans go extinct. I mean, if the planet becomes too hot to support human life, and it was already 130 degrees recently, not far from where I'm sitting, it could become too hot to support human life. And there's only so many hours a day you can stay in that air conditioner, which in turn accelerates the climate change. With the use of electricity, it's contributing. So it's a vicious cycle. And the irony is, with the fires burning down the West Coast, people still don't want to look at it. And one of the things that I think is so upsetting is that people regard themselves as victims of the pandemic, victims of the wildfires. But in truth, they are participants. As much as my heart goes out to them, Joe, they are participating in all of it by eating animal products.
They are. And clearly, again, going back to what we need to do, we have to be out there forming coalitions with worker groups. We know we've seen it already happening in South Dakota, down in Colorado. Workers are protesting at these slaughterhouses. They're speaking up. We need to work with them to draw the connection about their exploitation, the danger of eating meat. We know that major newspapers are talking about the pandemic as it's connected to these slaughterhouses. New York Times, Washington Post, big stories are going to be coming out. Clearly in Iowa, 22 meatpacking plants here in Iowa. Per capita, we are the most infected state in the country. So more information, more coalition building, lots of grassroots work. We can do this, but again, it's going to take time and education to do this. And I'm surprised, again, by the amount of workers that are involved in this and social justice people that are contacting us. So I'm hopeful. It's going to take time, but we're going to be in the media a lot more. And clearly with COVID, it's not ending anytime soon. More people are going to die. More fingers are going to be pointed at the meat industry. And the look is going to be where these plants are located and where these communities, how these people in communities, not only in the plants, but in the communities, are dying because of this virus that is connected to meat production.
Well, I think what you're doing is absolutely incredible, because I do feel that people do not want to admit that they were wrong about meat. Okay? And so if you give them an out and say, well, there's this new thing, this pandemic, that's killing workers. And if you're a workers' rights advocate, support us, then essentially they're shifting their behavior, but they could say they're doing it for a political reason as opposed to being wrong. Because I think a lot of it has to do with pride, has to do with, I've invested so much of my life doing it this way. I'm going to have to realize that I invested a lot of time doing the wrong thing. And I could say, as somebody who's 25 years sober, that when I got sober, I had to realize the only thing that had to change was everything. In other words, I had to realize that what I was doing with my life was wrong. And I had to have a whole, what they call an inventory of my life. And so that's what kind of is going to have to happen, because the truth is, once somebody stops eating animals, they kind of get a moment of clarity and they go, oh my God, look at the damage I did. Look at the destruction. Look at the death I participated in. And the way to clear that up is just amends, living amends. So working for the planet, working to convince other people not to eat animals, which almost every person who goes vegan starts doing. And it's really like proselytizing. I mean, for lack of a better word, once people wake up and they go, oh my God, if I had eaten meat over the course of my life, I would have probably killed 10,000 animals. That's the average, right? 10,000 animals each individual. That makes me a serial killer. Well, I'm lucky I caught it. And just like anybody, like me, I wish I'd gotten sober before I did, but at least I did when I did. And you're told, don't look at the past, just seek to offer your experience to help others. You don't shoulda, coulda, woulda it. I think that as people wake up, each person who goes plant-based starts telling other people, hey, this is the way to go. It's so much better. It's better for your health. It's better for the planet. You have more energy. You can avoid suffering the worst consequences of the pandemic, which we all know. And I'll just do final thoughts, Donny Moss. We know that the people who are more likely to die of the pandemic are people who have underlying conditions like obesity, diabetes, heart disease. These are the very things you get from eating the standard American diet of meat and dairy.
Yeah, I've been speaking to my own father who's 80, hypertensive, overweight, and diabetic. And, I've been telling him for years to make the switch to a plant-based diet. Well, he didn't. And now he's really in a precarious situation with this pandemic. But you know what, Jane, as my final thought, I'll say it shouldn't take a pandemic. It shouldn't take human health. It shouldn't take the environment for us to do what's ethically right. All you have to do is watch one video of what takes place inside of a factory farm or any animal agriculture facility in a slaughterhouse to know that this is just ethically wrong. We have no right to treat other sentient beings with such abuse and cruelty. They have every much of a right to live in peace as we do. And look, and as you said, now we're paying a price for our bad behavior. The world is on fire, the hurricanes, the pandemic. We're in trouble. We've got to change our ways.
Well, I just want to thank everybody. Final thought from Renee King-Sonnen.
Thank you, Jane. I think you hit the nail on the head. A group conscience. Being in the recovery movement myself, we have to do that inventory. We have to look at ourselves and we have to see exactly what it is that works and what doesn't work. We collectively really need to do a lot of self-reflection. This is the perfect time to be behind, bars, if you will, behind our windows of our house, not being able to go anywhere. Instead of going to the grocery store and, buying the meat in the meat aisles, search out plant-based options, see what's available to you in the plant-based sector. Tell your grocery store owners, butchers, that you want plant-based options. I mean, we have to start soul searching. We have to look at ourselves and we have to start creating ways to get this word out. Education is really key, and social media is awesome. It's the bomb. Jane, without your network, I don't know what we would do as far as animal rights go. I mean, you just blow it out the water, but we need to do something. And I don't know what it's going to be on national TV. I mean, when I sit in my chair at night and I just watch the news or the commercials and I go to the grocery store and I see the litany of blood and carcasses in this little bitty section of plant-based food. We've got to do something to topple this movement. I mean, this movement's got to be like front and center in people's faces. It's just, we got to do something to get it there, or you're right, we will go extinct.
Joe Enriquez Henry, your final thoughts.
Please join us. Come to boycottmeat.com. Join us. Look at the videos. Review what we have to say. Make a donation. Help us spread the word. We can mobilize. We can do this. We already are, but we need your support. We're up to about 1,000 supporters right now on the website. So join us. We can do this. Thank you.
Let me ask you one question, follow up. I know, just one more question. That was my nickname. Was given to me not in a loving way by photographers I've worked with in the past. But who's joining? Are they like vegans, or because we don't want to preach to the choir, or are they non-vegans?
Well, we haven't done a demographic yet, and that's why we're having the intern come on, is we want to begin that discussion. We'd like to survey what age group. I'm only guesstimating right now. It's more of a younger group, a group that's educated, but I'm hoping that we have the adult children of meatpacking workers, most of which are immigrants, coming on board. This is growing. This is a growing movement. We've seen it across the country, across the world. So with the intern, with that help, we'll be able to have that communication, saying out more information. And thanks to you, Jane, with what you're doing, all the words, everything being spoken right now, and all the prior discussions are becoming part of our inventory of information so we can help spread the word. So thank you very much.
Well, it's a team effort, and I'm just honored to be a part of this team. I want to thank everybody. Everybody on this video is one of my heroes. Donny Moss, check out TheirTurn.net. Renee King-Sonnen. Check out rowdygirlsanctuary.org and join boycottmeat.com. Sign up. Together, I think we can evolve beyond this really terribly destructive and cruel industry. Thanks so much for joining us. See you next Monday here on Boycott Meat. Jane Unchained. Bye.